The evening started like any other. I had finished my shift at the local coffee shop and was walking home through the park. The sun had set, and the path was illuminated by sporadic streetlights, casting long, eerie shadows. I had walked this route countless times, and while the park could be creepy at night, I always felt safe. But that night was different. I noticed them as soon as I entered the park. A group of boys, maybe in their late teens, loitering by the playground. There were 5 of them, dressed in dark hoodies, their faces obscured by shadows. I felt a prickle of unease but told myself they were just kids hanging out, trying to look tough. I quickened my pace, hoping to pass them without incident. "Hey, you," one of them called out as I neared. I ignored him, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "Hey! I'm talking to you." His voice was closer now, and I glanced over to see him stepping into my path, blocking my way. The others spread out behind him, forming a semicircle around me. My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a little fun," the leader said, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "Got any money?" I shook my head, backing away slowly. "No, I don't have anything." "That's too bad," he said, his grin widening. "Maybe we can find something else to take." Before I could react, one of the boys lunged at me, grabbing my arm. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Panic surged through me as the others closed in, their faces masks of cruel amusement. I struggled, kicking and yelling for help, but the park was deserted. They shoved me to the ground, and I felt a sharp pain as my head struck the pavement. Dazed, I saw their shadowy figures looming over me, heard their laughter echoing in the night. "Hold him down," the leader ordered, and rough hands pinned me to the ground. I tried to fight, but it was no use. They were too strong, and I was quickly losing strength. I thought of all the stories I had heard about attacks like this, the victims left broken and scarred. I had always told myself it would never happen to me, but here I was, helpless and terrified. I could feel tears of frustration and fear welling up, but I fought to keep them at bay. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching, fast and purposeful. The boys looked up, startled, and I managed to turn my head just enough to see a figure sprinting towards us. "Hey! Get away from him," a deep voice shouted. The boys hesitated, then scattered like rats, disappearing into the shadows. My would-be savior chased them for a few steps before returning to my side. "You okay?" he asked, helping me to sit up. He was a tall, athletic man in his early 30s, wearing a jogging outfit. "Yeah, I think so," I muttered, wincing as I touched the back of my head. "Thank you. If you hadn't come." He nodded, his expression grim. "You're lucky I decided to take a late run. Let's get you to a hospital. You might have a concussion." He helped me to my feet, and I leaned on him as we made our way out of the park. My legs were shaky, and my head throbbed, but I was alive. As we reached the street, I glanced back at the darkened park, shuddering at the memory of those boys' faces. At the hospital, the doctor confirmed I had a mild concussion and a few bruises but no serious injuries. The police took my statement, promising to patrol the area more frequently. As I lay in the hospital bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. The attack had shaken me to my core, a brutal reminder of how quickly safety can be shattered. I knew I would never feel the same walking through that park again, haunted by the memory of those boys and their cruel laughter. From that night on, I took a different route home, always looking over my shoulder, never fully trusting the shadows. The park, once a place of peace, had become a dark reminder of the danger that can lurk in the most familiar places.
It was a chilly autumn evening when I first saw him. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my front yard. I was settling in for a quiet night, a cup of tea in one hand and a book in the other, when the doorbell rang. It was an odd time for visitors, but I put my book aside and went to the door. Through the peephole, I saw an old man standing on my porch. He was hunched over, his thin frame barely filling out a tattered coat that looked like it had seen better days decades ago. His face was gaunt, with deep-set eyes that seemed to flicker in the dim light of my porch lamp. Hesitant but curious, I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. "Good evening," he said in a raspy voice. "I'm terribly sorry to bother you at this hour, but I've gotten myself quite lost. Could you spare a moment to help an old man find his way?" There was something off about him, something that made my skin crawl, but I didn't want to be rude. "Sure, where are you trying to go?" I asked, hoping it would be a simple matter of giving directions and sending him on his way. He seemed to ponder the question for a moment, his eyes never leaving mine. "I'm looking for Elm Street," he finally said. "Do you know where that is?" I frowned. Elm Street was clear across town, miles away from here. How had he ended up so far from his destination? "It's quite a distance from here," I replied. "Do you have anyone you can call to come pick you up?" His smile faded, and a shadow passed over his face. "No, I'm afraid not," he said softly. "I don't have anyone." The loneliness in his voice tugged at my heart, despite my unease. "Well, I can call a cab for you," I offered. "That way you can get there safely." He stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. "That's very kind of you," he said. "But could I trouble you for a glass of water first? I've been walking for so long, and I'm terribly thirsty." Everything inside me screamed to close the door and lock it, but my manners won out. "Okay, just a moment," I said, keeping the door mostly closed as I hurried to the kitchen. I filled a glass with water, my mind racing. Something about this whole situation felt wrong, deeply wrong. When I returned to the door, the old man was gone. I stepped out onto the porch, looking around, but there was no sign of him. The street was empty, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves in the breeze. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I quickly went back inside, locking the door and turning on all the lights. I felt a bit silly, overreacting perhaps, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Hours passed, and I tried to distract myself with my book, but my mind kept drifting back to the old man. Who was he? Why had he come to my house? And where had he gone so suddenly? Around midnight, just as I was beginning to calm down, there was a soft tap at the window. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to see the old man standing outside, his face pressed against the glass, those deep-set eyes staring directly at me. I jumped up, my breath coming in short gasps. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. He didn't answer, just kept staring, a twisted smile slowly spreading across his face. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but when I looked back at the window, he was gone. The police arrived quickly, but there was no trace of the old man. They assured me they would patrol the area, but there was little they could do. As they left, one of the officers pulled me aside. "You did the right thing calling us," he said. "We've had reports of a man matching that description in the area, always at night, always asking for help. Be careful." I thanked him and locked the door after he left, my hands shaking. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the memory of those cold, staring eyes. The old man never returned, but the fear he left behind never truly went away. To this day, I can't help but wonder what he wanted, and why he chose my house. And every time the doorbell rings after dark, I can't help but feel a chill of dread.
I've always been a night owl, often staying up late into the night, lost in my own world of books, movies, or work. My apartment, a modest but cozy one-bedroom on the second floor of a small building, has a large window in the living room that I leave slightly open to let in the cool night air. I never felt the need for heavy curtains, the sheer ones I had seen sufficient. Until recently, I never felt the need for privacy, at least not in the sanctuary of my own home. It started about a month ago. At first, it was just a feeling, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. I would look up from my laptop or book and glance around the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but of course, there was never anyone. It was just me, the flickering shadows, and the faint hum of the city beyond the window. One particularly late night, I was curled up on the couch, engrossed in a thriller, when I caught a movement from the corner of my eye. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my eyes darting towards the window. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the familiar outlines of the buildings across the street. I shook my head, scolding myself for letting a scary book get to me. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing night. The sensation of being watched became almost tangible, a weight pressing down on me. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, a trick of my mind, but it was relentless. I started double-checking the locks on my door, making sure the window was secure, but it did little to ease my unease. Then, one night, as I sat on the couch with my back to the window, I heard a faint, almost imperceptible tapping. My body went rigid, every muscle tensed as I strained to listen. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was deliberate, not the random noise of the city. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat, and there he was. A face, pale and gaunt, framed by stringy, dark hair, was pressed against the glass. His eyes were wide and unblinking, staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. My blood turned to ice, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if I were a mouse caught in the gaze of a snake, helpless and terrified. Finally, I snapped out of my stupor and scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed my phone and ran to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline, a tether to reality as I explained, in broken, panicked sentences, what had just happened. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they searched the area, there was no sign of the man. They assured me they would keep an eye out and advised me to get better locks and perhaps consider installing some cameras. Their reassurances did little to calm my nerves. The next day, I bought heavy blackout curtains and installed them, along with a state-of-the-art security system. For a while, it seemed to help. I started to relax, convincing myself that it had been a one-time incident, a freak occurrence that would not happen again. But last night, the nightmare returned. I was in bed, drifting off to sleep, when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open, and I stared into the darkness, paralyzed with fear. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was back. Summoning every ounce of courage, I crept to the window and peeked through the edge of the curtain. There he was, standing in the street below, his head tilted back, his eyes locked onto mine. A slow, twisted smile spread across his face, and he raised a hand to wave, as if we were old friends. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and grabbed my phone to call the police again. This time, I knew, the terror wouldn't be so easily dispelled. My neighbor had found a way into my life, and I feared he wouldn't stop until he found a way into my home.